Welcome to Mind Meets Body and Soul, a podcast that connects the dots between clinical mental health and spiritual holistic wellness. I'm Heather, a licensed clinical social worker and mental health guru.
And I'm Devon, a Reiki master, spiritual teacher, and lover of all things woo-woo. We're here to discuss various wellness topics, highlighting the connection between the mind, body, and soul.
We'll be offering nuggets of wisdom from each of our fields with the ultimate goal of bridging the gap between our two worlds. Whether you lean more into cognitive psychology
or flow with the woo-woo waters, our intention is to help you prioritize yourself and unlock a fresh perspective to healing, growth, and expansion. We're so excited you're here. Let's jump in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 3 of Mind Meets Body and Soul. I'm Heather.
Hi, guys. I'm Devon. We are so excited to be here for another episode of Mind Meets Body and Soul. And before we jump in, I just wanted to say that when this episode comes out, it'll have been 3 weeks since we launched the podcast. And I am so grateful for all of the love and support that we've been receiving. I mean, Heather, when we first shared the launch of the podcast, it was so great because I was seeing your side, your friends, your family, your clients coming in with all of their love and support. And then similarly, having that love and support from my friends and my side of things too was just so heart-filling, so affirming that we're doing something really cool, really creative. And it just makes me even more excited to be taking this podcast where we do.
I couldn't agree more. I'm so happy that this was also well received, and it just makes me so excited to keep sharing these conversations, Devon, you and I, but also being able to share this space with everyone that's listening. I think it's so cool.
I fully agree. So now heading into episode 3 of this podcast, I know we had brainstormed a little bit about the direction that we wanted to take this. Last week, I kicked us off by sharing the story of the photo shoot and how that came together so beautifully, of course, with its hurdles. But we made that connection between the mind, body, and soul right there. And we learned a lot from one another and shared how this story came together so beautifully. So, Heather, I'm going to pass the baton to you for this episode. Take it away. What are we chatting about today?
So, kind of to follow suit with the last episode that we recorded, I thought it would be fun. It's like my nerdy psychology fun to bring it all the way back to like the beginning of psychology and where it all started, because I think there's like a full circle moment here for us to be able to have together. So psychology is very much rooted in like ancient Greek philosophy. Plato, Aristotle were really some of like the fathers or the founding fathers of psychology, in that they were curious about our psyche or the mind and our soul. So very interesting that here we are thousands of years later talking about the mind and the soul. So Plato and Aristotle kind of introduced psychology in that way. In the 17th century, then psychology moved into something called like dualism, which is where we recognize the body and the mind as like two parts of our human experience. So we live our world through our physical body and through our mind. And these two separate but together things help us experience the world around us. The soul kind of got a little lost there, I guess. And then as psychology has evolved from there, we talk about behavior and we talk about thoughts. Behavioral health is kind of like what psychology falls under. We have our conscious mind and our unconscious mind. More recently, we've moved into this humanistic approach where we talk about motivation and we talk about free will and autonomy and emotion. So we're kind of in this place now where we're not so much focused on like the behavioral side of things. And I think psychology, you'll probably see more therapists talking about feelings and how they're natural and they're not dangerous or bad. And they're actually things that like we have to feel all the way through. So it's so interesting to me in kind of digging around and doing some of that research. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so on par with what Devon and I are talking about, because we're here now through all of this, we've gone through the conscious and unconscious mind. We've talked about the mind and the body, but we're bringing back and reintegrating the soul, which is kind of trendy also right now, but it's not new. Like this is actually like ancient stuff that we're talking about, that really all of this therapy and mental health stuff is like so deeply rooted in.
Yeah, no, I love that you're bringing that up too. And I fully agree with you. I think I mentioned this in the first episode that I think that this is where we are. It's like that full circle moment where it's okay, for so long, maybe we've been focusing just on the mind and then also incorporating mind and body, but really forgetting about the soul aspect of it, the spirituality of all of it. And now, yes, we are coming back to recognizing all three mind, body, and soul components of it. So I love that thank you, Heather, for doing a little digging and going back and finding that, yeah, there are roots, ancient roots to why we are not just mind, not just body, not just soul, mind, body, and soul. In my language, I always think of it as like we are spiritual beings having a human experience.
The other thing that I'm thinking about too is like, I don't know if I've ever said this, but obviously, like, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. So I have a master's degree in social work, but my undergrad is in psychology. So I'm kind of a mutt in between the two worlds, which are very similar. But psychology is more focused on like the individual, whereas social work is more focused on like advocacy, and we see an individual as a part of a system. And I think the connection I'm making like literally right now is that I've always liked social work because I do think we're part of systems. We're part of microsystems and macro systems. We're part of families and communities and organizations. And I think we forget the system, our founding system, or our first system is our own system of our mind, our body, and our soul. Like that system is like the one that I never connected until right now, that we're our own little system in and of itself, that we have to be working to like integrate and align.
Beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful. Yes. Thank you. And, I just realized that you've mentioned before, and of course, I know that you are a licensed clinical social worker. Um, I know in past episodes, I've explained what I do specifically as a Reiki healer and spiritual teacher. Would you mind explaining for our audience what it is that you do as a social worker and in your private practice? I know you mentioned that you work with individuals, couples, families, but when it comes to the your approach to things, what is that process like?
There's a running joke that social workers wear many hats. So we do a lot of different things, and people come to me for a lot of different issues or concerns or things that they're trying to work through. Um, I say to all of my clients at the very beginning in our initial session that coming to therapy is kind of like those crime shows you see on TV where they hang up the wall of suspects, and there's all these strings and sticky notes and things. So in therapy, I think someone's bringing to me their life story and their journey and their truth, and I help them organize it and hang it all up on the wall. And then we're always looking, or I'm helping look for connections, and I'm drawing patterns and noticing how things are connected and how things impact us. In therapy, I often am helping people better understand themselves. I think that's the hardest part about therapy, is being able to like look at yourself in the mirror. The self-awareness is challenging because we don't always like what we see. We're all works in progress. So I think therapy requires people to be willing and vulnerable to come in here and share some of their deepest, darkest thoughts, not only with themselves, but to say those things out loud to a kind of a stranger. So we do a lot of different things in therapy. We talk, but we talk about a lot of things, and we talk about a lot of patterns, and it's really a place to understand yourself a little bit better and do some of that like processing and healing.
Yeah. So coming back to then the beginning of what you said with like the roots of psychology being that both more mind and soul based, like do you find yourself, or are you in a process of incorporating more of that soul piece? Like, do you find that you're already naturally doing that? Has that kind of been put to the wayside in more modern psychology?
Yes. So it all depends. There's a lot of holistic providers and practitioners out there. And it I see it more of as like a spectrum where there's like the very rigid clinical by the book person, and then there's the like flowy, organic, holistic practitioner on the other side, and there's like everything in between. And I think what I'm leaning more into recently, even like prior to us meeting, is more of that like holistic side and helping people come in all the time. They're like, I had this gut feeling, and they're dismissive of that. You don't have to live your entire life by that if that's not something that you're ready or comfortable for, but like pay attention. Like that's a reaction. Something's flaring up or something's happening in your body, and our bodies are so intelligent and so smart, and we don't want to just be dismissive of that pain or that reaction or that feeling. We want to like listen to it and hear it out and then make our decision.
So important. And, you know, the more that I hear you talk about the work that you do with your clients or in your practice, the more I'm like, wow, you are incorporating so much of that mind, body, and soul, probably without even realizing it. So, what's interesting is that we see the clinical psychology world as just being the mental, right? And then like the holistic spiritual world as being more the body and soul. But really, inevitably, we are connecting and bridging the gap between all three of them, incorporating all three of them. I think it just, the difference is probably the like teaching, the certification of all of it, and the things that we have focused on more, or that we have maybe placed more importance on during our schooling, you know?
Yeah, I think it's funny because I used to say with some of my coworkers, like we would joke in my first job that I got after grad school that like we all missed the courses and how to actually be a therapist. There's all like all I mean, I went to school with my undergrad and my master's for 6 years total. And like at no point were there really courses on like how to actually do this work. It's all theory based, and it's all the history and like kind of understanding thing. But maybe that's a good thing because we can take that and like have our foundation, but then grow from there and apply these things in different ways. But there's really no right way or best way to work with an individual client or to work with a person. Like we're all human and we're all different and bringing our own experiences. I kind of like that I learned all the theories because I feel like it gave me a solid foundation. And I say to my clients all the time, I'm the expert in the field, right? I'm the professional here, but you're the expert on yourself. You've lived your whole life with yourself and you are the expert on you. So you come with your expertise and I'll come with mine, and we'll figure out how to support you in a way that's best for you individually.
Beautiful. Yeah, I fully agree with you. It reminds me of a question that somebody asked me recently of what label I like to use to describe who I am and, you know, what I do. Do I like to use the label of healer? Do I prefer to use the label of teacher? Because I've always said that I call myself a Reiki master, Reiki healer, and spiritual teacher. And I explained that for me, it felt more authentic, or more, it made sense to call myself both a healer and a teacher. One, recognizing that we are all healers. Each and every one of us is a healer. We have the capacity to heal ourselves. But on top of that, too, being a teacher, like you just said, like you are the one with the degree, you're the one with the, you know, certification, you are the facilitator there, but you are really just the one helping your clients to uncover what has already been there, right? Like, as you said, they are the ones who know themselves best, you know, better than anybody. And you're just really helping to guide them back to themselves.
1000%. And, you know, if we have any therapists listening, they might disagree with what I'm about to say, but I don't like to think that there are secrets of therapy. I am here to teach you all the things so that you don't need me anymore. I want you to have all the tools and all the skills and all of the understanding so that you can go out and live your best life without needing me. Maybe you come back and, people are in and out of therapy all the time. And I think that's also really important. But I'm not trying to like gatekeep any information. I'm here as mostly a sounding board to reflect back to you what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, and then we figure out, next steps or what it is that you might need.
Thank you for taking the time to explain a little bit about what you do as a social worker, because I realized that our connection came about because you came to me wanting to learn a little bit more about the holistic side of things. And it was easy for us then to connect, or for me to share a lot about what I did. But I realized, and I apologize for this, I hadn't really taken the time to get an understanding of what you did. And as we were doing in this podcast, is bringing the importance to all things mind, body, and soul, all of them together. So this is why I was really excited for you to take the lead to this episode, because those last two episodes we did kind of head into that more spiritual, the synchronicities, the things that came together for us in, perfect timing or in alignment. But I feel like what we're here to do in this episode is really to showcase more of the mind side of things, more of what you do and the importance of it.
And I think that's in part on me too, because I find your world to be so fun and sparkly. And I am just so genuinely curious about all of the things that I don't know. I do think it's important that we spend time talking about that side, not just because I'm the therapist in the conversation, but I think it's just such a critical part of who we are as people. So I'm curious, Devon, like in the work that you do, I try to incorporate the spiritual side. I try to incorporate the emotion and the body, and I'm working to incorporate all three. Is the mind part of your work? And if so, what does that look like?
That's a great question. And yes, absolutely. The mind is such a huge part also of what I do, because it's probably the area of us that people, especially who are new to this work, most relate to. Everyone is used to being in their mind, using their mind.
But maybe that's where this is supposed to help. Like, I am genuinely curious and, like I said, enamored by your world. And maybe part of these conversations, like you're feeling blocked because it the mind feels like a block to you. Like, and maybe you even just like talk about that, because I'm sure that's relatable to some people, like being more on that spiritual woo woo, water's warm, come over here side. I do think like there is something there that's important for people to hear you talk about. Like, the spiritual stuff is hard for people, is a hard pill for people to swallow. So for your world, the mental cognitive side is going to be hard for people, and maybe I can coach you through that. So maybe you say that, maybe you just are honest here that this is one of those things where we like kind of disagree a little, and that's okay.
It's not that I disagree with anything that you're saying whatsoever. I agree with all of it right now, but I feel this inclination to then jump in and be like, and also the body and the soul. And I think that's an important reminder that, see, I'm at a loss for words here.
Yeah, I think that's though so important for you to say, because that's where you are. We talk about like meeting our clients where they're at, and I think we have to be where we are. I would almost guarantee that you're not the only one. People are probably in our audience listening to like this therapist going on and on about the brain and the mind, when yeah, we are all three, but that doesn't negate the mind and how important that is too. Like, I think the whole thing that we just want to get across in this whole podcast is that all three are so important. And I really appreciate you like leaning into that stuck point and just owning that, like, this is hard for me to hear, because I'm sure there's things that we're going to say that are hard for people in the audience to hear. You're going to say things that are hard for me to hear, but that doesn't make it wrong or less important. It just, like you've said before, if we're getting that block, maybe we have to step back and think about it. If we're hitting that block, maybe we have to redirect. Maybe we have to learn something.
Yes, thank you. I feel like I've gotten a little like personal therapy session here, so I appreciate that.
There you go. I'll add it to your tab. The soul is kind of like the middle child, I feel, in these three, in that like it's been, or the spiritual side has maybe been, and like I said at the beginning, like quite literally forgotten about by psychology, like neglected in that way. So it makes sense that you're here as the spiritual teacher in this conversation that's like, hey, wait, hey, wait, hey, wait, like enough about the mind. We've been hearing about the mind for years. And now I think it's like you see its power and its importance. So of course you're going to be like, hey, hey, wait, like this is also so important. Exactly. So, I mean, that block I think is just telling of how special and important this conversation is to have. And it's not that we're saying that the mind or any of these things are more important than the other. They're just all important.
No, there's so many like valuable things that we've said in this episode that have gotten me to think a lot about why we came together here. And, you know, you said it in the beginning of the episode that you were really excited to learn from me. And similarly, I'm really excited to learn from you as well. And because it's so natural for me to come back to teaching of spirituality and being more in the body and soul, I think it's just like for me, the three of them are so together. Like there is no like separation. So I don't want to say that I ignore the mind. And like it's not like I don't think that you ignore the body and soul. I think it's just your teachings that haven't emphasized the connection, right? It was like a lot of focus on the mind. Yeah, I guess if you follow more the spiritual route, you allow yourself to be led by your soul. But in my work, I really, it's hard for me to pick out whether there is one that's stronger than the other because I think that it is just a constant flow of mind, body, soul in coherence with one another as we spoke last session, as we spoke last session, as we spoke as we spoke about last episode that we are constantly like our body and our minds are constantly in communication with one another. I find myself to constantly be guided or led by, yeah, it's really hard for me to pick out which one is more prevalent than the other most of the time. I mean, I guess throughout our day to day, we're more in our mind, but in my world, it feels like there is no separation between the three. They are always just in communication, bouncing off of one another.
And I think that's really important to have that flow and that fluidity of all three. And I think that's where me and my world are kind of catching up too. That like our mind, we focus primarily more on the mind. Then I'd say it's the body, and probably the soul is like the caboose following along. But I do think that it's important that all three are equally flowing and balanced. And I think that's fair, that that's where we really want to be. So I think there's a lot that's been said here. I think this was a hard episode for us to figure out. I think this was a really fun episode because I think, Devon, this for you was a little more challenging. I think we've leaned more into the spiritual side, the body, and I think this episode, having the mind be the primary focus, was a little more challenging, but I think it's still important to flow with it.
Absolutely. And you made such a good point that it was a little bit more of a challenge because it forced me to look separately at the mind, the body, and the soul. And especially in what I've been doing in my practice, it's like it's hard to see them as separate things. So handing the baton off to you was what I really wanted to do. But as it turned out, it was really just an opportunity for me to have a learning moment through this episode. So you're right. A lot has been said throughout the recording of this episode. I found myself experiencing a lot of mental blocks. I feel like I haven't stopped to question or compartmentalize what I do because I see things as all three mixing, flowing together. But you're right. This episode was a was an eye-opening experience for me and a good challenge for us to have this conversation and talk through. So thank you, Heather.
Yeah, I love a good challenge. I think this was really fun for me. Like my therapist hat came on immediately and I wanted to push through and see what came up in this conversation. And I think it just highlights that it's everything in balance. We want to flow and have fluidity, but we don't want too much flow or too much fluidity. We also need the ability to compartmentalize a little bit, and being able to do both and all of the things, I think will help us all be flexible and stronger.
Absolutely. So with that, I think we wrap up the third episode of Mind Meets Body and Soul. Heather, it is your turn this week to look up at your vision board and let us know what is calling out to you.
I have this, it's like a timeline and it has different times, and it says hesitant, positive, grounded, thankful. And I think the hesitant part actually is what stood out to me, but then it's followed up by positivity, grounded, and thankful. So I think that's actually kind of, it is what's standing out to me, but it also reminds me of this episode that like it's okay to be hesitant. And, I actually really like the hesitancy.
The trajectory of this episode was like facing the mind blocks and trying to like find my grounding, but then eventually coming out at the end of the episode feeling really positive and thankful that I learned something new today about what you do and about myself. And I think that's what we're here to do in this podcast, is to challenge some of our own beliefs, or for our listeners to stop and be like, what she's saying is somewhat new information for me, and maybe even leads to some resistance as we experience in this episode. But maybe it's the awareness of that alone that then leads us to the next steps of grounding and positivity and gratitude.
Yeah. I mean, I wish we were in person doing this because I want to give you a hug. I'm really proud of you. It's all good. We're figuring this stuff out. There's no right or wrong way. We're all just here trying to figure it out, and we're coming together to share what we know. This was great. I love this episode.
Oh, thank you, Heather. So with that, we thank you all for joining us for another week of Mind Meets Body and Soul. Bye, everyone.
See you next week. We are so glad that you took the time to share this space with us. We'll be releasing new episodes of Mind Meets Body and Soul every Tuesday, so be sure to give us a follow and share this podcast with those you love.
To connect with us and join our communities, head to the show notes where you'll find our contact information and individual websites. Until next week, stay grounded, keep growing, and trust that everything you seek is unfolding for you.